few seconds early, but I'm really excited for Hannah to do a presentation for us today. Hannah is our newest member in to our TDF family. She is our Forest Health and Sustainability Program Specialist, and ever since we have hired her on, I have been extremely excited that we have another person who is not only incredibly knowledgeable and passionate about her job, but she has a lot of knowledge, experience, and education in entomology and bugs. And so I love that. And so I'd like to introduce Hannah Hollowell. Hannah, you can take over.
And you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the introduction, Jackie. Let me see if I can advance this. Wait 1 second.
Looks like Hannah accidentally jumped out of the meeting, but she'll be back shortly. There she is. All right, she's back. You're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yep, yep.
Okay. I need to make sure that I can advance the slide. That was my problem.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Apologies.
Take it away, Hannah.
Thank you. So first I wanted to say that it's really, really neat to be able to join and just see how many folks are involved in hemlock conservation here in Tennessee. Like Jackie said, I just joined TDF, but I'm from Fall Branch, Tennessee, up in the northeast corner, and grew up hiking around Bays Mountain all the time. And so it's always fun to hear about the treatments that the crew has done there. And it was funny when I was back home for Christmas, I dragged my brothers hiking with me at Bays Mountain, and every hemlock I would go up around to the back side of it and look for the dot. And I would tell my brothers, I was like, that tree has been treated. So I really do appreciate all the work that all the folks on this call and other collaborators have done for hemlock health. It's really encouraging because I do a lot of work with HWA and with EAB and laurel wilt with my job, and it's neat to see just how successful this has been in Tennessee. Like what David Arnold said at the start, like this is very encouraging to see how many folks are involved and just the effort and collaboration that's gone into this. So Jackie had asked me to share, did my screen advance, by the way? Okay. Jackie had asked me to share some about other forest health threats that are affecting our hemlock in Tennessee or have been reported in the past that are concern here. And I focused on 3 main factors that we've kind of seen recently or are concerned about. And the first was Rosalinia Needle blight. It's something that we saw a lot this year, and we had a lot of reports of it this season in particular. So I'll go into detail about that, but that's something that we're going to cover. Another thing is elongate hemlock scale. This is another insect that has been reported in Tennessee, although the actual distribution, there haven't been a lot of reports to help determine exactly where it is or the extent, but that's something that we're always keeping our eye out for because it has caused damage in New England. And then abiotic factors, there are a lot of different factors as far as soil characteristics or drought and other weather conditions that might impact hemlock health and kind of tie back into excuse me, these other issues that we see. So I'll start with Rosalinia Needle blight, because this is something that I had not ever seen before until we were hiking, and Jackie pointed it out to me and showed me this kind of pretty noticeable needle blight on our hemlock. So this is caused by the fungus Rosalinia Herpetocoides. I think that's how you say it. It's a fungus that's primarily found on firs and spruce in the western US. So it's not something that we've seen a lot here in the East, although I have seen some reports where it was reported on Christmas trees and other firs that are in the eastern US as well. But what we've seen it on, at least here in Tennessee, primarily has been hemlock. And it's very noticeable because it causes needles to turn brown and the needles to mat together because of the fungal hyphae that are growing across the surface. So we see this, this photo that Jackie shared with me of a very distinct browning of the inner needles matted together with that hyphae. And you can even kind of see, it looks almost fuzzy towards the center. And that's, again, the hyphae from the fungus just kind of growing as a little netting over the surface. And the reason why we saw it so significantly this year in particular is because this pathogen is favored by cool, wet weather, which is kind of what we were seeing towards the start of the year, where we had a mild temperatures and plenty of moisture that caused kind of like the perfect storm for this particular fungus to just proliferate. So we saw a lot, or primarily this is seen in interior and lower branches. These trees that are growing that don't have great airflow through the interior of the tree, we see symptoms most heavily in the interior or lower branches. And going along with that, in areas where hemlocks grow densely, or maybe are grown in a hedgerow in like an urban setting, we see a lot of damage, significant damage from this when there's no airflow between trees, and that pathogen just can explode there. And currently, there are no fungicides that are labeled for use. I know that there are a lot of silvicultural methods that have been established, especially out in the western U.S., where this affects a lot of firs and spruce. They have a lot of silvicultural methods that they've developed for managing this needle blight out there. Here in the eastern U.S., in Hemlock, some maybe potentially thinning of trees could help improve air circulation and might reduce some instances of this, but in the grand scheme of things, there's not a lot that can be done for large areas where you might not be able to get in and thin out trees. So in the grand scheme of things, we don't see this pathogen causing significant damage on large trees that are well established in and of themselves. But we do see in younger trees that this might cause significant damage or reduction in, or it causes needle loss, which could reduce the overall health of the tree and make it more susceptible to other issues. And because this pathogen has a tendency to remain in needle litter or other parts of the environment, we do see it resurface. So even though I've only been around for this season, I know Jackie's talked about how she's seen this needle blight in the past, and how there seems to be certain years when the conditions are just right for it to resurface. As far as managing it in areas where it can be pruned out, we can prune it. Aside from that, it's hard to manage on a large scale, and it's kind of sometimes best to just allow it to run its course if it's in an area that's not very accessible. So that's Rosalinia needle blight. This is what we saw the most this year, and is very iconic and easy to see in the field. Jackie took a ton of photos that she sent me of this infected trees, and then the needles in particular. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about is elongate hemlock scale, and it's an insect that some folks might be familiar with. It has been, it's another non-native insect that attacks hemlocks. It's been primarily an issue in New England, and although it's been reported in Tennessee, the exact distribution and like how large the populations are, I wasn't able to really dig up. And it's not something that I've seen enough to make me think that it's currently a huge issue but correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have eyes everywhere, and I'd love to know if folks are seeing this. But I'll give a bit of background about elongate hemlock scale as well, since it is a concern in a lot of parts of the eastern U.S. So like I said, it's not native to the U.S. It's originally from Japan and was found, I believe, in New York in the early 1900s. So it's been in the eastern U.S. slightly longer than HWA. And it's also a pest of both eastern and Carolina hemlocks. Like I said, we know that it's present in Tennessee, but we don't really get extensive reports of it. So if you see it, I'd like to hear about that as well. One thing that I think is interesting is that there are a lot of similarities and some obvious major differences between elongate hemlock scale and HWA, because just passing through the woods, if someone didn't know what they were looking at and they saw all of these scales on the underside of needles, they might be like, oh, that's HWA, but it in fact is a scale insect that is in, here's me being an entomologist, it's in the same order, in the same suborder as HWA, and it also has those same piercing sucking mouth parts. So it also is sucking the nutrient-rich material from these trees. The difference is elongate hemlock scale is on the underside of the needles themselves, and they're actually sucking the nutrients from those needle cells themselves, while HWA is attached at the base of those needles and is feeding there. And looking at them with these close-up photos, you can see that HWA makes more of like a cottony, what we typically see, the cottony covering. Elongate hemlock scales will cover more of a, they'll have more of a light tan to brown covering, and the males will have a slightly white cottony more covering. So it is a bit different in where they're feeding and how they're feeding. Another thing with elongate hemlock scale versus HWA is the extent of damage, and that's the big thing. Across the board, we've seen a lot higher mortality from HWA than from elongate hemlock scale. There have been a lot of studies researching how elongate hemlock scale causes damage, because it can kill trees. And from what I've seen, it can kill trees in as little as 5 or so years to as long as like 10 to 12 years. But most of the research that I've seen has tended to point more towards HWA as being the heavy hitter. Like HWA is what's causing the most significant damage to hemlocks. And elongate hemlock scale, when it's present in the same areas as HWA, has in some cases caused a lot of damage, and in some cases it tends to work more like a secondary pest and doesn't damage it quite as much directly. So I know there's a lot of research that I haven't read about elongate hemlock scale, because it's been around for a while, and a lot of folks have put in a lot of work trying to decide how best to manage it and how best to prioritize managing HWA and elongate hemlock scale in areas where they both occur together. The main management insights that I've been able to find, the first is don't fertilize hemlocks that are infested with elongate hemlock scale. In most cases, the increase in nitrogen in those hemlocks actually increases the population of scales, which is the exact opposite of what we want it to do. So they've, in general, in areas where there are hemlocks that are infested in like urban areas or horticultural settings, the main thing is do not fertilize because you're just feeding the scale more. Other research has found that there are chemical control options available for this, but that those tend to have impacts on the natural predator population. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's more predators. They've seen more natural predators of the scale I think native natural predators that have gone over and started attacking the scale. And by increasing the chemical usage, some cases they were seeing a decrease in the predator population and then a resulting increase in scale after that. So there's been mixed results with that. At any rate, elongate hemlock scale isn't extensive enough in Tennessee to really justify treating on a large scale anything until we see if we found an infestation of it, then we could take a look at other management options and comparing how we can treat both elongate hemlock scale and HWA together. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was the abiotic factors that go into impacting hemlock health, because we know that hemlocks are not at all tolerant to drought. They can't really stand those conditions for extended periods of time, and there's a lot of impacts of the site conditions in different stands that also impact the health of the hemlocks. This could be things like the general drainage of the soil, or the acidity or alkalinity of the soil. And in general, there are a whole suite of abiotic factors that can have varying impacts on hemlock trees. This could weaken trees to the point that this increases the speed at which HWA could cause tree mortality, or it could also predispose that tree to other factors. And then the reciprocal of that, or kind of the result of that as well, is that trees that aren't able to transpire efficiently are not going to be able to uptake insecticides when we do apply them. So sometimes, in some instances, we might see something where we have a tree that's been impacted by drought, and then these secondary pests come in, but we're not able to efficiently control the secondary pests because of the health of the tree is in so great decline that it's ineffective. That being said, that's kind of a downer after all these great things that we've heard about HWA. It's sad to hear that there are other insects and pathogens and factors that also negatively impact our hemlock health, and that we also need to be aware of as we're managing HWA on top of it all. But I wanted to, oh, I talked fast. Well, that's okay. I wanted to finish with something that I kind of just in general, as the forest health program specialist, I've tried to share with folks, because I think it helps me think better about how we manage forest health threats as a whole across our ecosystems. So the infamous disease triangle of plant pathology, but I also have seen it in entomology, talks about three main factors that go into the development of a disease. So you have a susceptible host, like a tree that could be either maybe have some predisposing factors, like genetic factors that make it susceptible to a pest or pathogen. There are environmental conditions, like what I just mentioned. Those abiotic factors do impact the way that both the host interacts with the ecosystem and the pest or pathogen interacts. And then the pest pathogen, the causal factor, what kind of tends to be the trigger point for a particular disease. So with each of these factors, the balance of the three is what can cause a disease, or maybe help protect a tree from developing a disease. So I always like to think about the fact that our management strategies have to be able to address as many of these three factors as possible. So in the sense of hemlocks, we see that there's been a lot of work to try to identify what species, or try to identify resistant hemlock that could, in the long run, and we're not there yet, but in the long term could have resistance to HWA and could be replanted in our landscapes. As far as environmental conditions go, it's hard. You can't control like the weather or the climate, but there are microclimate conditions that we can impact through silvicultural techniques or through in landscape areas through proper management of hemlocks, providing them with water or any other additions that they need to thrive in that environment. And then obviously what has been so successful for us has been managing the pest or pathogen itself, which we've done a lot with imidacloprid, dinotefuran, but also now starting to see the advent of biocontrol and how that might play into this, even more so reducing the pressure of HWA on our hemlocks. So I think that was all I had. I wanted to kind of wrap up by asking folks if they had any just general input on hemlock health threats that y'all have seen, because like I said, I didn't even know about Rosalinia needle blight until I went on a hike with this HWA strike team and Jackie, and she pointed it out. So I'm happy to hear if y'all have seen things, these other secondary pests or pathogens in our hemlocks that we could chat about or anything like that. Oh, I see Pythium. Yeah. But I'll go ahead and here. This slide has my contact info. So if you think of anything down the road and want to shoot me an email or give me a call, feel free to. And I can also answer any questions from the chat.
Awesome, Hannah.
So fast.
I know, but you did great. You did great. You exactly hit exactly what I felt our community needed as far as representing the other things that we're seeing here in Tennessee that are affecting. And I know that Bob Lee and I have noticed a lot of the Rosalinia needle blight on his community's trees and throughout the Cumberland Plateau in 2017, 2018, and then again this past year, 2017 and 2018, it was really bad. But it's like Hannah said, there are things that you can do for the smaller trees you can prune, but when it's on a larger scale in larger trees on the interior, there's really not much but to let things like that run its course. So does anybody have any questions or comments for Hannah?
Hey, Jackie, it's Hugo.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I have a very large hemlock tree down along the creek. It died 2 or 3 years ago. It's probably a 150-year-old tree, but it's fairly low in elevation for hemlocks. It's about 1,400 feet in elevation. Has a southeastern exposure, very rocky conditions. We had the severe drought in 2016. We probably had the HWA showing up about that same time. And within 2 or 3 years, it was dead. Do y'all believe that that's probably just a combination of factors, the stress of the location and the drought and so on? Because I really have trouble blaming just the HWA for that tree dying.
I would agree. I do believe that it's a combination. I've done a lot of reading of research papers because I'm trying to learn as much as I can, but there've been a lot of folks who have looked at how variable it can be even across the range of hemlock in the US, up north where climate might help us out a bit more in controlling HWA. It might take a lot longer for an HW or for mortality to occur. But down here where we don't really have cold snaps might not occur quite nearly enough. We might see HWA wipe it out a lot faster. And like you said, if it's in a location where it's already under stress, I could see that that combo 1-2 punch that kind of took it out.
Yeah, and I have personally seen that with a lot of hemlocks. There's, Hugo, there's a lot to be said about an environment that a being lives in. And, just as us humans, we thrive in certain environments and we can grow depending on the food we eat and how much water we drink and not smoking and, on and on and on. But there's something to be said for trees and plants and animals that when hemlocks do not have a great growing space and they're fighting, let's say they're older, they might have an injury, maybe there is, like Hannah was saying, an abiotic issue, whether that's drought or flood clearing away soil from roots of over 50% of the roots of the tree. It's a combination of things, and when I tell people that from the time your tree is infected by HWA, your tree has 4 to 10 years. It really could have 2 years, depending on the current health of the tree and the growing space and how much sun it gets, how much water it gets. I know on Nature Conservancy land, this past year I was walking on Chestnut Mountain, and there were trees that had never been treated before, about 10 dBH, that were in the middle of a field by themselves, so not in a stand, had great sunlight, and I know had been infested with HWA for more than 4 years, but they were healthy looking and they were doing fine. But that's because they had the optimal opportunity to be healthy trees without anything else stressing it out. So there is something to be said about the many factors that stress a tree.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Comments or questions? I want to let you guys know that for those of you who have a pesticide applicator's license for the state of Tennessee, I put in the chat the link for you to go and fill out the form. You'll need to have your name, contact information, and then also your application license number, and that should be on the card. Great, Margot. Thank you for adding that developing genetic resistance in hemlocks link. Appreciate that. Thank you, Debbie, for participating today. All right, everybody, if there are no further questions, that is the conclusion to the 2022 Tennessee Hemlock Conservation Partnership meeting. I do want to invite everyone to, if you have questions, to not only reach out to me in Tennessee, you can reach out to your area foresters and Hannah Hollowell. I am so excited that we've had a great season so far with the HWA Strike Team. Kudos to you guys on your presentation this morning. They are beasts. They've got the rest of the season to work, and they'll be down south working in Savage Gulf and some areas down there. So they're going to have a lot of fun. So thank you, HWA Strike Team, for being here and for all the good work that you're doing. Jim, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, hey, thanks everybody. Unfortunately, I was tied up with other stuff this morning and missed the presentations. I wasn't able to get on until about 2, but the ones I heard were great.